good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I'm speaking to you from Australia, Melbourne, Australia, and currently I'm a member of World Vision Australia. So, an organisation better known for development activities, for relief in emergency situations, and child sponsorship. And very often, when I speak about my work in environmental restoration, people are quite surprised if they know anything about World Vision. They're surprised that we touch on environmental work. I think the reason why World Vision does this will become clearer as I go through my presentation. But I just want to say thank you to Ali for the invitation, and I'm very, very happy to share with you. Two caveats. One, I'm not an ornithologist. I love birds, but my area of expertise is in trees. And secondly, I actually don't have a lot of photos of birds. I'll share what I have, but for a novice, they're quite difficult to photograph and get a good clear picture. But I'll share what I do have. Within World Vision, I sit within a team dedicated to promoting natural regeneration around the world. And it's a very exciting time for me. It's taken us a long time to get to this point where World Vision is actively and intentionally promoting this approach globally. And I just want to draw your attention to this lady, Juliet Bell. Her role is our global partnering lead. Now, we have very ambitious target to restore 1 billion hectares of degraded land. And even World Vision, it's a very large non-government organization. We can't do that alone. And so we have Juliet on board to form partnerships and alliances, whether formal or informal. We don't, that's not the point. It doesn't have to be under the World Vision brand. We're happy to share information freely and to share what we know and about where we're working. So I just wanted to point out about Juliet there. And World Vision actually does a lot of environmental activities, natural resource management, waste management, agroforestry, and farmer managed natural regeneration. So while it's not known for these activities, it is well embedded in everything that we do. Today, my talk will roughly follow these lines. I'll talk about the history and the definition and the impact of this approach to restoration called Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration, or in short, I'll just refer to it as FMNR. What's this got to do with birds? What's the relevance for birds? Well, it's pretty obvious to you, I think, but I'll go through that, and then I'll finish up with a call to action. So I started my career in Niger Republic, West Africa, borderland of the Sahara Desert, landlocked country, and one of the poorest countries in the world. And when I landed there in 1980 with my young family, I was shocked. I was probably 24 years old then. In my short lifetime, what had been a biodiverse dryland forest with fertile farms in the clearings, with springs and with wildlife, in 2 short decades, it had been reduced to this at the point of ecological collapse and barely able to support life. It was devastating. And there are consequences. Certainly climate change was a factor, but large-scale clearing of the land was a significant cause of this degradation. When we degrade the environment, there are consequences. And so people living in that region were experiencing increased severity and frequency of drought, extremely strong windstorms that would abrade the germinating food plants or bury them outright. And people would have to replant multiple times in order to get a crop. Even in the years when it did rain, people could lose their crop because there would be an explosion of insect pests. And it's not rocket science. If you remove the habitat for insect-eating birds and spiders and lizards and provide them with a limitless food source of people's food crops, then of course the insect population will blow out. And so people in Niger really struggled. hunger was common, displacement, conflict over scarce resources. In my mind, if deforestation was one of the root causes of all these problems, then the solution should be relatively simple. Let's put trees back into the land and do it quickly. And I was young then, I was enthusiastic and passionate. I threw heart and soul into this work. I read all of the manuals. I consulted any experts. I tested seeds from around the world, different methods, different times of planting, trying to succeed. Everything that I did was a failure. Maybe 80% of the seedlings died. The very people who we come to help, they called me the crazy white farmer. To them, this was a big nonsense. Here they were regularly hungry, they were poor, and all Tony could talk about was trees that they didn't understand. And so they laughed at me behind my back, and they certainly didn't put much effort into this tree work that they saw as a waste of time. And so being young, I was getting very discouraged. It would have been quite easy to give up and go back home at that stage. Nothing seemed to work. And it all came to a bit of a head one day. I was actually driving a vehicle load of tree seedlings to the villages. I knew full well most of those seedlings would die, that people didn't care. But I'm a person of faith, and my last resort, I just asked God for wisdom. What should we do? How can we overcome this problem? There must be a solution. And it's amazing. I'd been on this bush track nearly every week for 3 years at this stage, eyes open, but totally blind to what had been there the whole time. And if you look in the background, there's these little bushes, what look like desert bushes. Perhaps they're agricultural weeds. You don't really know until you take a closer look. And on this day, one of these bushes caught my attention, and I took the trouble to walk over and take a closer look. If you look at the leaf of any plant, the leaf shape is very, very distinctive, and it's like a signature. As soon as I saw the shape of that leaf, I realized that's not a weed, that's not a desert bush, that's a tree. And I bent over, I brushed away some of the accumulated sand, and sure enough, under those stems, there was a tree stump. This had been a tree, it was cut down, and it was trying to regrow again. And for me, in that moment, everything changed, because I realized from my time in Niger, there were millions and millions of bushes just like this one. We didn't have to plant trees. We're not fighting against the Sahara Desert. I don't need multiple millions of dollars or new technology or a miracle species of tree. Everything that I need is literally at my feet. And so my whole approach from that day shifted. Now, these bushes and dormant seeds that are across that landscape, I call it an underground forest, because if we cut a tree down, we can't see it above the surface, but beneath the surface, there's deep root system accessing moisture, nutrients, stored sugars. And it just needs a chance. If we remove the constraints, cutting, continuous grazing, burning, we plow over the top of these things. If we remove or alter those constraints, it'll give that tree an opportunity to do what it was created to do. It will regrow with very, very little effort and at no cost. And so this was a revolution. Now, knowing what to do was one thing. Knowing how to convince skeptical farmers was quite another. Remembering they called me crazy. This was nuts to them. All they wanted was to grow food and cash crops. How was I going to convince them? I got the idea, what if I asked for volunteers? And at that time, I worked in 10 villages, and I asked for one volunteer per village. And I invited them, would you come on a journey of discovery with me? I think this will work. I've never done it before, but I think this will work. Please don't do it on your whole farm in case it fails. And remember, this is very important, because farmers are risk averse. They're already hungry. They're already poor. They can't afford failure. So I gave them the comfort. Let's just try it in a small corner of your land, and we'll try it for 1 year. You teach me what you learn and observe, what you know, and I'll teach you the little bit that I know. And then together we can adjust this and tweak it so that it meets your needs. And they agreed to do that. And that was the start of this amazing journey. It started off with just 10 farmers and eventually spread across the country of Niger. And in some of the later slides, I'll share it's spreading around the world now. So what is it? There's three ways that we can look at this approach. Firstly, as a technical approach, let's seek out and select those regenerating bushes growing from stumps, those germinating native seeds that are already in the soil. We'll find out where they are and choose the ones that we want. In the case of tree stumps, when you cut down a tree, the natural response is to send up multiple stems. There could be as many as 50 stems on one stump, and that's far too much competition to get rapid growth or a good form for your tree. So we thin the excess number of stems, take away the weak ones, the broken, the crooked ones, leave the most robust, the tallest. We prune some of the lower branches. It's like releasing a spring and allowing all of the growth to be focused into the growing point. We protect that growth from threats, fire, livestock, cutting. We work together as a community. Do we agree as a community to set a certain number of bylaws for the protection of these trees and the management of them and how people will benefit from them? As the trees grow, we monitor the growth. From time to time, we might need to come back and cut some of the suckers. Some of the lower side branches might regrow. We'll prune them off again. And then importantly, in this instance, now in some places we are creating nature reserves, but in this instance, these are people's farms. This is their livelihood. If we did not allow people to utilize these trees in a sustainable way, they wouldn't do it unless you paid them. And no bank in the world, no fund in the world is going to pay all the farmers the amount of money that would be needed to do restoration at the scale that's required. The incentive for farmers to do this is the direct benefits from the trees: fuel wood, poles, wild foods, traditional medicines, fodder, fertilizer, and so much more. That's key to the success of this. Otherwise, very, very few farmers would adopt this. So that's describing FMNR as a technical approach, but nobody would even do this unless there was mindset change. And so it's a development approach. The normal way of farming in Niger at that time, and it's typical across Africa and much of the world to this day, a good farmer is a clean farmer who cuts all the trees. The trees are weeds, they're a nuisance, they're an obstruction to cultivation, they compete with the crops. This is the attitude. In order for people to adopt this, there needs to be mindset change. And so primarily, I'm not so much a technician on genetics or biology and growing trees. 95% of my work involves convincing farmers and communities it's in your best interest. You'll be able to create a better future for yourselves and for your children if you work with nature instead of destroying it. And there's steps and processes that we take to bring this about, but that's the key. And if I can win people's hearts and minds, because everything that you need, nature has already provided: seeds, stumps, everything is there. If you convince people to work with nature, the rest is relatively easy. And then there's this third level. If we convince enough communities across a watershed, across a county, across a whole country, then effectively we can have landscape level restoration through FMNR. And you can see the satellite slides there from Niger. Pre-1975, tree density on farms was less than 4 trees per hectare. By the mid-2000s, tree density reached about 40 trees per hectare. On some farms, even over 100 trees per hectare. This method spread organically from farmer to farmer at the rate of 250,000 hectares per year for 20 years. And at the end of that period, it's estimated there were some 200 million trees across 5 million hectares of farmland without planting a single tree. So this was actually revolutionary. And I'll just jump one slide and come back to that one. A study was done in the 3-year period prior to the implementation of FMNR. And they calculated that about $160 million had been spent. And if you allow for all the losses, all the dead trees, cumulatively, there was a net of 20,000 hectares of trees growing. And in their own words, they weren't doing very well. They were struggling. If you do the maths, it cost $8,000 per hectare. Now, if you take the Sahel region alone, there were more than 300 million hectares of degraded land. It would cost in the trillions of dollars to restore at that cost. It's just not going to happen. In the 20 years after the introduction of FMNR, I estimate that between my budget and the budget of other NGOs and other actors promoting this method, about $10 million was spent, over 5 million hectares restored, and that comes out to less than $2 a hectare. The method is still spreading years later. So with each year, as it continues to spread, the cost per hectare actually continues to decline. So it really was a game changer. And in fact, many of the governments, many of the NGOs had completely given up on tree planting because it was so costly and so ineffective. So this is a game changer because it's low cost. It's a game changer because it can happen very, very rapidly. I mentioned that we estimated spread at 250,000 hectares per year. It's a game changer because we can do this at scale. So for me, it's very, very exciting. And so why would farmers even do this? How can you convince farmers who believe trees are weeds, trees are competing with my crops, with my pasture? Well, it turns out that trees bring many, many benefits. As they grow, they're drawing down CO2, so they're mitigating climate change, but they're helping farmers to adapt, reducing wind speeds, reducing temperatures, building soil organic matter so that it retains moisture for longer, higher crop yields, greater livestock production, bigger incomes. Farmers are doing this because it makes economic sense to them. I've just lost my place. What was I going to say here? So multiple benefits. You can see there in the top left, and Ellie, that's actually from Ethiopia. In this particular project, the farmers hadn't seen some of their native fruiting trees for 40 years, and they listed 9 different trees that they could collect fruits from after starting the regeneration. Traditional medicines. We can now keep beehives. So here's a completely new income stream that's less vulnerable to climatic changes than annual crops. Many of these tree species are fodder species. So we can harvest that fodder and sell it, or we can fatten animals and sell the animals. It's generating income. It's diversifying farm enterprises so that farmers are much more resilient to climatic and environmental shocks. It could be that one year we have a heavy rain. The more enterprises you have, the less likely you are to fall on your face because there'll always be something that continues. This is our project in Ethiopia. So the setting in Niger was agricultural land, and farmers were leaving an average of 40 trees per hectare. Here we had the opportunity to do this at scale on communal land. And you can see that's very hilly. It's not cultivated, and people don't live on that hill. When we started in 2006, you can see at the top right photo, it was just a bare hill. And by 2012, it had completely covered, again, without planting trees. The exciting thing from a humanitarian perspective is World Vision entered this area in 1984 during a very severe drought and famine. And we saved many lives through food relief. We stayed for a rehabilitation period. And then there was a development phase of about 20 years. And we did everything. We built schools, clinics, we improved agriculture, micro enterprise. Despite this, every year, to some degree or other, some years more, some years less, World Vision was obliged to give some degree of food aid. And when I joined in 1999, I was very surprised, and I tried to understand how this could be. I realized all that good work, but we'd neglected to address one of the key underlying issues of environmental degradation. The environment is the foundation for development. It's where our food comes from our products that we can create businesses from, our water and so many things. It was degraded, it was broken. And so it wasn't until we started to repair that things changed. 6 years after the introduction of FMNR, and we're talking about 2,700 hectares on this mountain, the historically food aid dependent farmers sold 104 tons of grain to the World Food Programme. How could this be? They said, Mr. Tony, in those wet years, and we do have a number of wet years, we still wouldn't get food because the water would flood off those hills and destroy our crops, and we couldn't get our seeds in the ground early enough. And in the dry years, not only did we lose our crops, but we had no wild harvest from the hills. As soon as that forest started to regrow, in the wet years, the flooding stopped. And it gave us confidence that if we invested in improved seeds and better methods, our labor and our money wouldn't be lost. So it reduced risk. And in the dry years, they said to me, Mr. Tony, sure, this year there's less rain than what we would like. But what we observe is that when those clouds hit our forested mountain, they're more likely to drop their rain on us than on our neighbors. And because temperatures are lower, wind speed is less, more organic matter in the soil holding that moisture, what little rain falls is more effective. So it was very, very transformational. And I think birds and wildlife, they have a bush telegraph. Nobody called them, but they seemed to understand that the forest was coming back, and they flocked back to this mountain. It was quite astounding. And so, yes, there's certainly been an environmental change. However, the biggest change that I see is the restoration of hope. And so by working with nature instead of destroying it, farmers are able to grow more and different types of crops and livestock, and they're much more resilient. The trees are creating more favorable microclimate for growing things and improving the fertility of the soil. And so if you could put your feet in the shoes of an average farmer who's tried so many things and failed, to the point where they don't want to be disappointed. They won't try new things anymore because of the pain of failure. And then here comes this very, very simple intervention, literally a solution at your feet that enables you and empowers you to create that future that you want for yourselves and your children. And the reaction, the joy and the positivity, the sense of dignity and pride that comes back is very, very powerful. So I'm not an ornithologist, but from observation, I think some of the key problems for birds around the world and in Africa, habitat loss. Some countries, Zambia, for example, some countries are losing as much as 200,000 hectares of forest every year. There's timber extraction, charcoal, clearing for farming, and so on. Habitat loss is very, very significant and it's ongoing. Secondly, hunting for birds and for eggs, both for food and for illegal pet trade. And I put a picture there of a slingshot there. So many children carry a slingshot in Africa. If I had power for a year and I could do one thing, I would ban these things. So many birds succumb to these slingshots. Then a third factor perhaps is the widespread use of very lethal pesticides. Many bird species are insect eating. They pick up the weakened insects and they get sick and often die themselves. And this must be devastating bird populations in Africa. A big problem is people's perceptions. Just as with trees, trees were seen as a problem. They were the enemy. We have to cut all the trees. People have certain perceptions about birds. Well, what's a bird? It's just meat. Or birds are pests. We have to kill them because birds eat grain. Well, some birds eat grain. So how do we counter these things? And I think the way we tackled this with natural regeneration was we told a true narrative. We countered those arguments and we did it again and again. We did it in different mediums through theatre, through giving talks, through written articles, through radio. Birds are so beneficial. Pest control, they fertilize our fields. Some of them are pollinators. And very often people are not brought up understanding the benefits of birds. They only hear the downside, or they only see them as a ready source of protein. And so that messaging is very, very important. Trees and agriculture are very compatible. And I want to take the example of just one species here, Phaidherbia albida. And you can see it in the background here on the top left photo. And we talk about this halo effect. So underneath the tree, the spread of the tree, the crop is thriving. And it's much, much taller than the surrounding crop. It's much greener. And there's a couple of factors here. One is the temperatures are lower. Two is that this tree is a nitrogen fixing tree, so it's fertilizing the soil. The third is, if you notice, even though this is rainy season, that tree has shed its leaves. It has quite a different phenology to most other trees. And so it gives a very beneficial light shade. But there's a fourth factor. I don't know if this is universal around the world, but cattle egrets, in my experience in Niger at least, cattle egrets only nested in Phaidherbia albida trees. And so they're adding to the fertility under the tree. But in addition, if you ever observe these birds, from sunrise to sunset, they're scouring the fields, catching locusts and caterpillars and anything that's smaller than them that moves. So they're providing a free insect control service, and with no toxic residue, and they leave fertilizer in the fields in addition. So there are very good arguments for having trees on fields and for attracting birds to those fields. Interestingly, when I first started this work, one of the biggest arguments that people made in opposition to what I was doing, they said, if we grow trees on our land, grain-eating birds will attack our crops. And this was a very real fear. What's amazing is I've been teaching this approach for 40 years in more than 40 countries. Globally, there are probably 18 million hectares or more of some form of FMNR, agroforestry, forest restoration. Not once has anybody, the message has never got back to me that there's been a significant problem with birds eating grain, not once. Now, I'm not saying that I have all the information from all around the world, but surely in 40 years, if there was a major problem because of grain-eating birds, surely I would have heard it. And I think that that's an important message to repeat to farmers. Actually, it might not be as big a threat that you think. So it's pretty sad when you think of the rate of deforestation, you think of the use of pesticides, and you think of people's attitudes towards birds. But I have strong reasons for hope. This again is that project in Ethiopia. And I visited this site maybe 2 years before this photo was taken, before the regeneration work had started. It was a drought year. There were no trees, no shrubs on this hill. And as I walked up the hill, all I saw was rocks and deep cracks in the ground. And there were rats, the only form of life. There were rats scurrying in between the rocks and in and out of the cracks. It was like a picture from the end times. Fast forward 2 years later, and they had the communities had started the restoration work. I put one leg out of the car. I was getting out of the car, and then there was this loud chorus of bird song. And I felt in my heart, they're singing and they're saying, thank you for giving us our home back. I don't know if that's what they were really saying, but that's what it seemed like to me. There are reasons for hope. Nature is incredibly resilient, robust, and if given a chance, if given a lending hand, it will bounce back faster than you would imagine. And again, more photos from Ethiopia, this same project. So a few years later, you could easily get lost in this forest. And I was in a group that we'd broken into two separate groups, and we got separated. We couldn't hear the other group. We couldn't see them. It took us a long time to find them. This has become a dense forest and a wonderful habitat for many types of birds. More reasons for hope. I talk about people in the past being enemies of trees. And so this was on a visit to Tanzania. And Mr. Marimo sheepishly took me by the hand and walked me across to the edge of his agricultural field. And he said, Mr. Tony, this tree, he was very embarrassed. This tree used to be my enemy. And I did everything in my power to kill it. And you can see there, the top of the stump, it's hollow like a bowl. Every year he would pile sticks and grass on that stump and light it, trying to destroy it completely. However, I learned about FMNR and the benefits of trees on my field. And today I'm ashamed. This tree used to be my enemy. Today it's my friend. And so my work, I'm actually in the business of turning enemies of trees into friends of trees. And I encourage you in your work, can we work together to turn enemies of birds into friends of birds? And the results of that will be amazing. Another man from Tanzania, Johanna, we felt ashamed. Our children only knew our wildlife from photos in school textbooks. Since beginning this FMNR pilot, and it was a very small area, it's less than a hectare. Since beginning, small antelope and other animals have returned, and we bring our children here to see them. So there's this sense of remorse, regret, perhaps shame that they've denied their children the rich diversity of nature that they experienced growing up. Now, those are negative sentiments, but in our work, we use them to bring about good results. In our workshops, we have an exercise called past, present, future. And we ask the community, in your childhood, what was the environment like? And we get this wonderful picture. It's like a description of the Garden of Eden. Water was plentiful. The rain was predictable. The soil was fertile. There were wild animals. Our women walked very close to the village to get firewood. It was a Garden of Eden. Second question, what's the environment like today? Oh, Mr. Tony, it's terrible. Our women are walking for 4 hours. It's dangerous. Our crops, our soil's no longer fertile. We're hungry from year to year. Children aren't in school because we can't feed them. We're too poor. The wildlife has disappeared. The springs have dried up. Just a tale of misery. The third question is the point in the workshop where something happens, something magical happens. And I ask, if we continue business as usual, destroying the environment, what does the future hold for our children? There's something about that question that's very, very powerful, and bringing it out in the group with your peers, it's very, very revealing. And so the answers that we get, oh, it will be hell on earth. It's already difficult. It will be hell on earth. We will have to leave our ancestral lands, everything we know and love, and go to the capital. In one country, they said, we will become cannibals. There's already armed robbery, break-ins. We'll become cannibals. People, this question somehow scares people. And in the safety of working with your peers, people discuss these things. What have we done? How have we come to this? Now, I don't leave them there. That would be a terrible place to leave people in the workshop. I say, oh, that's really sad. Let me share with you a story about a group of people in Niger who turned that situation around. Do you think it might be possible here to have a similar experience? And in every audience, you have the pessimists and you have the optimists. And the pessimists say, no, it's impossible. It won't work here. That neighboring village, they always light fires. Those people's livestock always damage our work. But you always have the optimists. And they're the ones you need to cling to. Let's give it a try. Let's experiment on a small area and we'll see where this takes us. And I want to argue with you. I want to encourage you with protecting birds, with encouraging communities. Start in this way. What have we lost? Where are we heading if we continue this way? What kind of future will our children have, never hearing bird song, never watching beautiful birds fly and do bird activities? What can we do about it? These are very powerful exercises. I love this quote. This one comes from Senegal. Oh no, from Ghana. Everything should not just be for food. Other things should have a right to live too. There's something good deep inside of us when we see nature, birds, animals, trees. And I think maybe we're guilty in the West. We have this perception that poor village people, anything that moves is just food. But no, they have hearts and sentiments like any human being. There's a side of everybody that has a love for nature. We just need to bring that out and give it a chance to express itself. And this one from Senegal, this is very powerful. The types of benefits we see pushes me sometimes to leave my home and just walk through my field to appreciate the trees and the environment. Now, I believe many in the audience here are Africans. I lived in Africa for 17 years. I visited for 20 years since then. In my experience, the only thing that pushed people to their farms was hunger and the need for fuel wood. The farm is a place of drudgery, of hardship. Often it's a place of failure. Nobody goes to the farm unless they have to. And yet, here's this woman, 1 year, 2 years into FMNR. No, it's a joy. I just want to go in there to be with nature. There's something very, very fundamental that shifted here. And it's true for trees, and I believe it can be the same for birds. More reasons for hope. When we started this work in the early years, people were desperately poor. There was a shortage of wood. People had no money. And so if we were lucky, they would grow the tree for 1 year, 2 years, and then cut them. Necessity drove them to this. I've been so encouraged when I've gone back to Niger subsequently, and I've found farmers have allowed trees to grow to maturity and to form hollows, which obviously are habitat for certain bird species. This made me so happy. And I asked the farmers, well, why have you done this? Why have you shifted the way you manage these trees? And there are a number of reasons. One is they believe that the taller trees were closer to the clouds and were more effective in bringing rain. Another one was, farmers have a high degree of freedom to choose which tree species they want in their fields. So naturally, they would choose the trees that were good for their crops and animals. Fodder trees, fertilizer trees, trees that lost their leaves in the rainy season and benefited the crops. And there was another reason that once the trees get higher, they believed that there were evil spirits in those trees and they didn't want to touch them. So a number of reasons, but the end result was very good for birds and for nature, that people are tending over time, they're tending to let those trees grow to greater maturity. And you get pleasantly surprised sometimes. This farmer in Senegal, and you can imagine how dry Senegal is, I think 8 months, no rain whatsoever. He took the trouble when he visits his farm, he put this broken pot in the tree and he fills it up with water every time he passes because he likes seeing birds in his farm. These are the kinds of people, positive deviants. Can we amplify their voice? Can we give them an audience amongst their peers to explain why they do this and what the benefits are? And perhaps through these positive deviants, encourage others to do similar acts. In that same Ethiopian project, we had a consultant come in and train people on how to identify and to monitor the birds. And at first, people laughed. Why would we do that? This is a crazy Western idea. Birds, that's just food. Birds, they're a nuisance. They eat our crops. But by the end of the exercise, they have become very, very good. And I've written down here, the consultant was amazed. Some of the best monitors could identify 60 species of birds. And they were very enthusiastic about this by the end of the training. So World Vision's target, given the benefit restoration has for children, for communities, for their livelihoods, reducing food insecurity, increasing income, as well as the environmental benefits, but primarily we're a humanitarian organization, and we realize the value of this work for humanitarian purposes, but also we're very convinced that climate change is going to undo all of the good work that's happened over the last decades. And the wonderful thing about trees is as they grow, they draw down carbon dioxide, so they mitigate against climate change, but also they help people to adapt. And so because of these reasons, World Vision has pulled out all the stops. Let's restore 1 billion hectares of degraded land worldwide. Now, even though World Vision is the largest NGO in the world, that's an extremely large number, and we understand fully we can't do that alone. So we're working with governments, we're working with other NGOs, with environmental groups, with communities, anybody who will listen to us to try and achieve this goal. And the way we'll do it, certainly World Vision works in 100 countries. We will try to incorporate FMNR into every sector that we work in: water and sanitation, education, food security, whatever sector that we're working in, we're building up World Vision's capacity to spread this through all of our programs. But that alone won't achieve that goal. The second part of this approach is through partner-led spread. And I'll share a QR code at the end of this presentation. Online, we have manual in English, French, and Spanish. There's online training, free training, self-led training, and many other resources. We will partner formally or informally. We just want to get the message out there and help as many organizations as possible to adopt this method. Thirdly, much of the spread that occurred in Niger wasn't through direct intervention of a project or an NGO. It happened from farmer to farmer. So we expect Once this method's introduced and people begin to benefit directly, more food, more fodder, and so on, it will spread on its own. So a big portion of the billion, we hope, will come from organic spread. And then fourthly, by creating an enabling environment. Many people cut down trees not because they don't like them, but because they don't own them. Even on their own private farmland, the policies in many, many countries are that the government owns the trees. Ironically, if you give people ownership of the trees, overnight they switch. This is my tree, and I'll do everything in my power to protect it. So we advocate for either tree ownership or, at the very least, user rights. If people are going to do this work, give them the assurance that they will benefit from them by being able to harvest trees or tree products. We can create an enabling environment by stimulating markets. Timber and non-timber forest products. Can we help the farmers to get a fair price and to get their produce to the market? So this is the approach that we're taking to achieve the billion. We have 4 what we call catalytic countries where we're starting this work in Africa: Zambia, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Uganda. But in reality, we have projects in many countries across Africa, maybe 20 countries. There's a focus also in the dry corridor in Central America and in the Amazon basin. The target is to restore, and in the case of where there is already forest, maintain 25 million hectares. So this is a major initiative of World Vision in the Latin America area. And you can see the countries listed there. Again, we're a humanitarian organization, so our primary focus is on development, responding to social, environmental, and economic challenges. And you can see the number of children and adults that they hope to reach. But at the end of the day, nature wins as well. In the Amazon case, they want to work with local farmers who are using slash and burn. And instead of slashing everything when they plant their crops, just slash those ones that are perhaps too dense or too competitive with the crops, but leave some that are there for a little bit of forest cover. Have your food production period. Oh, I need to move this. And then when the soil is infertile, the farmers tend to abandon that land and move on. And that's when we do active FMNR, restoring the forest through managing this tree regrowth. Now, I haven't personally visited this project yet, but I believe from what I've read and observed, I believe that when they do this, they won't actually have to abandon this land. With the right tree species managed in the right way, they should be able to maintain the fertility of the soil and hopefully not need to go out and destroy new forest every 5 or 10 years. You can see the emerging trees. Again, this is in the Amazon, and this is in the restoration phase when they're using FMNR to regenerate the forest. We use a platform called Restore. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. RESTOR. You can find it online. Just helps us to plot the sites and to monitor the revegetation over time. And again, in Latin America, these are some of the pilot areas where we'll be working. And so here's the challenge for you. Oops. I keep having to move my picture so that I can see. So as I mentioned, if you go to this QR code, there's online training resources available, manuals, audio, visual presentations, and lots of stories from different countries. And in time, we'll be able to put on that platform the live results. As we monitor the spread of the forests, you'll be able to track that on this website. It's not up yet, but we're working very quickly towards that. Some of you may be in a position to either support World Vision restoration projects or in some way, whether formal or informal, to partner with us, and especially in IBA. And I wrote down what that meant. I'm sure you're familiar with that. I hadn't heard it till today. Important bird and biodiversity areas. So perhaps there's areas of interest to you that overlap with where World Vision works, and perhaps we could form a partnership to restore and protect such areas. I encourage you, it really is groundbreaking, it's revolutionary. But if you look at most restoration projects in the world, they're tree planting. And particularly in the more arid and semi-arid regions, it's expensive, it has a high failure rate, it's very unlikely to be replicated without ongoing funding. This is revolutionary. And so if you have this good news today, please share it. There's lots of resources online. Your sphere of influence, wherever you work, this information needs to get out there. It's not mainstream yet, despite its impact. And then I want to challenge you too. And I thought of this term, twitches for trees. Why not form twitches groups that are practicing FMNR? Start your own projects, even if it's got nothing to do with World Vision. We're happy for others to embrace and utilize this method. And again, I want to encourage you. Perhaps you say, well, I don't have money. Or World Vision's this gigantic organization. I don't have an organization behind me. In 2011, I spoke in Jordan at the Permaculture Convergence Conference. So there I am up on the platform. And unbeknown to me, in the audience was this young man who came from Lake Victoria, the island of Rasinga. It's in Lake Victoria. And that island had been completely denuded, no forest left. People, especially the youth, were all leaving. There were no opportunities there. He had no money, no project behind him, and just the very brief instructions that I'd given, very simple description of what FMNR is. And he went back, he brought together a group of farmers and he said, look, I heard this good news. Let's give it a try. And through his example and working with the community, with no project, they started their own restoration work. So I just want to encourage you, even if you have no money, if you have passion and motivation, it's amazing what you can do. So I'll leave it at that. I hope there's time for questions. And thank you again, Ellie, for the opportunity. And it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Donc, je vais faire la traduction en française. Comme la présentation était assez longue et pas simple à traduire, je vais surtout traduire la première partie. Comme beaucoup d'entre vous n'étaient pas encore présents, comme ça, vous pouvez un peu rattraper ce que vous n'avez pas entendu. Donc, aujourd'hui, la présentation, c'était de Tony Rinaudo, qui vient d'Australie. Il est aussi connu sous le nom de The Forest Maker, donc le faiseur de forêt. Il travaille à World Vision, qui est la plus grande ONG au monde, et qui font pas que de la restauration d'habitat, mais aussi plein d'autres choses, surtout liées, il parlait pas mal de programmes d'aide alimentaire ou des choses comme ça, plutôt liées humanitaires. Mais aussi une grande partie de leur travail se concentre sur la restauration des habitats. Donc Tony, c'est pas un ornithologue, il a un petit peu parlé d'oiseaux dans sa présentation, mais c'est pas un ornithologue de base. Et en fait, il a commencé sa présentation par son premier voyage au Niger à l'époque. Et en quelques années, il a pu être témoin de la grande dégradation des habitats au Niger. Il a dit une partie de cette dégradation et de cette désertification était due au climat, avec des changements climatiques et aussi des variations dans la pluviométrie qui font qu'il y a des périodes de sécheresse. Mais une grande partie était aussi due à l'activité humaine, surtout liée à la déforestation, aux feux de brousse et au bétail. Donc évidemment, quand les terres sont dégradées, il y a un impact très négatif sur la biodiversité, dont les oiseaux, mais aussi en premier lieu sur les populations locales, les familles paysannes qui n'ont pas de récolte, ça augmente leur pauvreté. C'est un peu une sorte de cycle, négatif comme ça. Donc, lui, quand il a assez vite, il s'est dit, ah ok, alors si la solution c'est que les arbres disparaissent, pardon, si le problème c'est que les arbres disparaissent, la solution c'est de replanter des arbres. Donc il a essayé de planter des arbres sur ces terres dégradées au Niger. Les gens le prenaient pour un fou. Et au début, il n'avait vraiment pas de succès. Il y avait une très forte mortalité des pousses d'arbres qu'il plantait. J'ai noté plus que 70%, mais il me semble que c'était même plus encore dans sa présentation. Donc ça marchait pas très bien. Et même s'il était très acharné à essayer de planter ses arbres, les gens, comme je dis, le prenaient pour un fou. Et voilà. Et un jour, alors qu'il était toujours au même endroit, il s'est intéressé à un buisson. Il a remarqué qu'en fait, ce buisson, ce n'était pas un buisson, mais un arbre. Et qu'en fait, beaucoup des buissons qu'il observait dans le paysage, ce n'étaient pas des buissons, mais des arbres. Les arbres étaient déjà là. Ils étaient en train de pousser, mais on leur laissait juste pas la chance de vraiment se développer. Donc, comme les arbres étaient là et qu'ils poussaient de manière naturelle, il n'y a pas besoin de les planter, mais on peut simplement les protéger. Donc, il a voulu essayer de faire un peu une étude pilote, une expérience. Donc, pour ça, la prochaine étape, c'était de convaincre quelques agriculteurs, des volontaires, d'essayer cette expérience dans leur champ. Et c'est de là qu'est né ce qu'il appelle en anglais FMNR, c'est pour Farmer Managed Natural Restoration. En français, il n'y a pas de traduction directe, mais la traduction la plus proche, ce serait ANR pour... non, ANR, c'est en anglais aussi. RNA, pardon. C'est pour la régénération naturelle assistée. Et il a donné quelques principes techniques qui font le succès de cette approche. Donc, l'approche, elle vient d'abord à trouver, du coup, dans les champs, trouver des pousses d'arbres qui sont vigoureuses, donc trouver où sont les arbres, et trouver les pousses les plus vigoureuses qu'on va favoriser. Donc, on va d'abord les tailler pour garder les branches et l'architecture de l'arbre qui favorisera sa croissance. Et ensuite, il faut le protéger. Il faut le protéger de la taille, pas qu'il soit taillé ou déforesté par quelqu'un d'autre, du bétail et aussi des feux de brousse. Et du coup, pendant toute sa croissance, il faut un peu jouer, le tailler et le protéger pour favoriser sa croissance. Et après aussi apprendre, ou souvent les gens ils savent déjà faire, mais pouvoir l'utiliser. Donc, utiliser tous les produits forestiers non ligneux qu'on peut dériver, etc. Donc, ça pourrait être de la nourriture, des produits qui peuvent avoir une valeur ajoutée et qu'on peut après commercialiser, ou qu'on peut utiliser comme bois de chauffe ou comme compost, etc. Donc ça, c'est l'approche technique. Mais il a dit que le principal challenge, c'était de convaincre les gens de faire cette approche, puisque c'était quelque chose qui était un peu nouveau. Donc il a dit une jolie phrase que je vais traduire en français. Il dit que le plus important, c'était d'abord de reverdir les esprits avant de reverdir la terre. Donc vraiment de convaincre les communautés. Et c'est seulement en convainquant les communautés qui après elles-mêmes vont disséminer cette approche entre elles qu'on peut avoir un impact à grande échelle. Il a aussi montré que cette approche donc de régénération naturelle assistée avait un impact beaucoup plus grand, était beaucoup plus efficace en termes de coût et simplement d'efficacité de régénération que la plantation d'arbres. Il a fait quelques estimations, il a montré que pour régénérer 1 hectare avec cette approche, il faut simplement investir 2 dollars, puisque simplement les arbres sont déjà là et ils se régénèrent, alors qu'il faut investir en comparaison 8 000 dollars par hectare pour planter les arbres, parce qu'il faut les planter, il faut les arroser, il faut les entretenir, c'est beaucoup plus de travail. Donc cette méthode est simplement plus efficace, même si elle est en fait peut-être moins utilisée ou moins connue que la plantation d'arbres. Et en plus, elle produit plein d'avantages aux paysans, c'est un peu sous cet angle-là qu'on peut les convaincre, parce que ça va, en plus de tous les produits qu'ils peuvent récolter et utiliser sur les arbres, ça va aussi améliorer leur récolte, parce que ça va rendre les terres à nouveau fertiles, ça va protéger aussi les récoltes, etc. Donc, avec tous ces avantages, l'idée, c'est que convaincre une petite partie des paysans, après, ça va pouvoir se disséminer. Il a aussi parlé que dans l'approche à l'époque de World Vision, donc son ONG, c'était surtout focalisé sur l'aspect humain, donc construire des écoles, des programmes d'aide alimentaire, etc. et qui voyaient que dans des endroits, il a cité un exemple en Éthiopie, la situation ne s'améliorait toujours pas, et qu'en fait, ils se sont rendus compte qu'ils avaient négligé la restauration des habitats. Parce que même si on travaille à essayer d'améliorer la vie des populations rurales, sans améliorer les habitats, sans améliorer les écosystèmes naturels dans lesquels ils vivent, ça ne pourra pas être durable. Donc, ils ont un peu changé leur focus pour aussi intégrer cette approche dans leur travail. Euh, et évidemment, quand on restaure des habitats ou des écosystèmes, ça n'a pas seulement un impact positif sur la vie des gens, mais aussi sur la biodiversité, sur les mammifères, sur les oiseaux et sur toutes les autres espèces animales. Donc, il a vraiment montré que cette méthode améliore la résilience et la prospérité, autant des écosystèmes naturels que des communautés locales. Euh, mais après, il y a toujours une peur quand on lui dit les gens, c'est quelque chose que j'entends aussi souvent dans les projets au Burkina Faso, que je fais quand on restaure les habitats, les oiseaux reviennent et les oiseaux, ils sont vus comme, alors ça, ils sont vus comme nourriture, mais ils sont souvent vus comme ravageurs, avec des espèces négatives, des conséquences négatives pour les cultures. Ils vont se nourrir des graines dans les cultures, ravager les cultures. Donc souvent, la perception des gens vis-à-vis des oiseaux ou des paysans, c'est la même en Europe finalement, elle est négative. Donc il faut aussi travailler à ce niveau-là et essayer de changer la perception des gens pour voir que les oiseaux, en fait, ils fournissent tout un tas de bénéfices. La plupart de ces oiseaux sont finalement insectivores. Ils mangent les insectes ravageurs des cultures. Ils peuvent aussi fertiliser les champs. Ils ont un tas d'aspects négatifs. Il a pris un exemple que j'ai assez bien aimé de cette espèce d'acacia, Farderia albida, qui pousse dans le Sahel, qui a déjà qui est déjà très apprécié des gens parce qu'on peut l'utiliser de différentes manières. En plus, il y a une floraison ou une feuillaison qui est un peu décalée. Il est aussi du coup très apprécié par les oiseaux. Il a montré une photo où on voit que les cultures sont beaucoup plus grandes, elles marchent mieux autour de ces arbres. Et c'est à cause de différents aspects. Par exemple, l'ombrage qu'il apporte, c'est aussi un arbre qui fixe du nitrogène, de l'azote dans le sol. Donc ça va améliorer la fertilité du sol. Et il dit que dans cette région, les hérons garde-bœuf sont très attirés par cet arbre, ils nichent sur cet arbre, ils se nourrissent autour, donc ils produisent un service écosystémique en mangeant des ravageurs dans les champs comme des locustes. Et ensuite, ils nichent sur cet arbre et défèquent et ça sert d'engrais sous l'arbre. Donc c'est un exemple que c'est très holistique un peu comme manière de voir. Et je vais m'arrêter là dans la traduction, comme ça on a le temps pour des questions, même s'il a parlé après de plein d'autres choses, il a montré plein, surtout des témoignages et des exemples d'ateliers qu'ils font maintenant vraiment pour convaincre les gens. C'est la plus grande partie du travail maintenant, c'est convaincre des gens, disséminer cette approche. Et la fin de sa présentation, c'était surtout un message d'espoir. Il disait que la nature et finalement les gens aussi étaient très résilientes si on leur donnait une chance. Donc si on la laissait prospérer, elle est très résiliente et ouais, c'était vraiment un beau message d'espoir à la fin de sa présentation. Donc voilà, je suis désolé d'avoir pas fait traduire toute la présentation, mais je crois qu'on doit avancer avec les questions.